Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 31 of SuperSports, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of vehicles of a high performance nature, generally exotics as well, that fit between sports cars and supercars. They are beyond sports cars, but not necessarily on the same level as a supercar, in terms of either performance or maybe just the overall package or the marketing, etc. And in this particular episode we're featuring probably one of my favourite cars of the class, and funnily enough a car which I specifically didn't used to like, the Aston Martin Vanquish. Now this is the older shape Vanquish, not the Vanquish S, but it's still a very impressive all-round car in terms of spec. It's a big car, and it is a luxurious car. It's not some stripped out track day special in a similar way to something like a Spec V GTR or the Nismo GTR or something like a Scuderia or a Superleggera. It's a luxury tourer in effect, a Super GT touring machine in a similar vein to vehicles like the older shape V8 Vantage, to some degree the Mercedes SLR, the Bentley Continental GT, that kind of thing. So be that as it is, what does it have to offer? And does its size and weight get the better of it? Because that could very easily happen around the track. Well, in terms of sheer spec, as I said, it's an impressive car. It's powered by a 5.9 litre naturally aspirated V12, which, with the race exhaust on Gran Turismo, actually sounds fantastic. It shares the exact same exhaust sound as a fully tuned Viper SRT10, which is ridiculous considering one's a V12 and one's a V10, but still, the sound that they've given it does at least sound very cool. As far as power, it produces 692 horsepower, which, considering that it is naturally aspirated, is actually very good. If it was supercharged or was able to be turbocharged, you could easily be putting out close to 1,000 horsepower. As far as torque, it puts out 524 pound-feet, so perhaps not as much as you might expect from a pretty large capacity engine. And it weighs in at a not half bad 1,361 kilos, which, given the size of the car, the luxury, etc. that it starts out with, that's actually not bad at all. That's a similar kind of weight that you'd expect from something like a GTR. So it's certainly not carrying a ridiculous amount of excess baggage if you compare it to other cars in the class. It is of course heavier than some, but not ridiculously so. It's not like comparing a tank car to a Red Bull. It is at least in a similar playing field. As far as horsepower per tonne, well, it's 508, which doesn't sound that great, but it doesn't have as much power as some of the other cars in the series, and as we said, it is heavier than many of them. 508 horsepower per tonne still isn't bad though by any stretch. As far as PP, I would say the PP on this car is very good. Usually on cars of a high performance nature, extremely high performance cars especially, their PP can be a little bit too high. For the Vanquish, I'd say it's about right, 581. That's a very good PP for this car. Any higher than that and its size and weight would really start to be a disadvantage. But at around that level, you can really use its sheer power, and the fact that being a more long-distance GT machine, the handling is actually a little bit smoother and heavier than a typical extreme supersports model. So for some tracks, it will actually give you an advantage instead of a disadvantage in terms of handling. Now, as far as the price, it is a pretty expensive model. It's a little bit cheaper than a Ferrari F430, but it's still up there at 238,000 credits. So the best part of a 250,000 credits is a lot for any kind of car. Is it worth that? Well, I would say yes. Obviously I wouldn't object to it being cheaper, but all things considered, yeah, I would say it is worth that. Unfortunately, it is not a premium model, and that is a shame. It would be nice to have that fully detailed style and the interior, etc. But as it is, it's still a fantastic looking car anyway, extremely muscular. there are 2 or 3 cars that I classify as having a very similar style, a very similar ethos and presence, and that would be the Viper, the Vanquish, and the SLR. Those 3 cars to me have a very similar shape, a similar style. It's all about that big bonnet and that bulky, muscular shape, which just commands respect wherever the car is parked or driving. And I love that. I love that kind of styling in a car. In terms of what it can do, the top speed is unsurprisingly for a British performance car on Gran Turismo not as good as it deserves to be. If you compare the spec that it has to other vehicles of a similar type with a similar spec, it is slower than most of them. The top speed is around 250 under its own power, which isn't unrealistic, funnily enough. I mean, that's a little bit too quick, technically, if you compare that to real life, but on the game, most of the cars are completely unrealistic to an extreme degree. So the Vanquish is unrealistic, but not by very much, so it still falls behind, unfortunately. In terms of high-speed draft potential, it's got a pretty decent amount. It certainly has the power to get up to speeds of 280, 290 or even 300 in draft pretty easily, and the fact that it is a SuperSports shape means that it copes with those speeds very well. As far as acceleration, it's more than enough to take on most other SuperSports models on most tracks. As far as handling, it's a little bit more tail-happy than some, because of course it's not designed to be breaking lap records, but on the right track, tracks which require more power-based PP tunes, it's certainly an interesting alternative. It looks fantastic, it sounds fantastic, and it is a fast car, all things considered. So, that's it for this episode overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.